welcome to another episode of the Mountain Ground Podcast. And as always, we have Frederik, Pieter from Gegrond, Nicolette and myself on board. This is our 5th episode, so we're very happy things are getting going. And it's all about getting your fix, getting your caffeine fix through the AeroPress, getting your caffeine and adventure fix in the mountains through taking your AeroPress out there and learning how to make it. And Nicolette is also going to talk a bit about caffeine and actually what it does to performance and how it can enhance your performance. And as always, the little Dex dog is in the background being very, very energetic. I think he might have chewed on some Gegrond coffee beans. But so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the guys from Gegrond, because they've got a full set with regards to the AeroPress today. And I'm like, this is the episode I've been looking forward to. Like, I'm really, really excited to learn more about the AeroPress and just how it can serve my purposes in the mountain. So, Frederik, Pieter, it's all yours.
Yeah, it's always like catching up with you, and I think after our discussions the last 4 episodes, the AeroPress was a prominent topic to be discussed, so I'm glad we're going to dive into it. I know Frederik he quite enjoys his history, and so I'm going to give over to Frederik so he can give us a bit of a chat on how the AeroPress actually started, which isn't your conventional way of starting or developing a coffee component or maker, so to speak. So I'm sure you guys will find it quite interesting.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's good to be here again. I think every podcast it seems like we touch on the AeroPress and then we say nope, let's leave it for a different podcast. But I'm glad we actually got to it because it's definitely one of my favorite methods of brewing. And I know Pieter is also quite stoked for an AeroPress. But yeah, so actually there's actually an AeroPress history video, a movie that was made. I watched it a while ago, but I needed to brush up on the history a little bit for this podcast. But it's a really interesting piece of equipment, and the history itself is also quite unique. It's not a very old invention. It was actually launched in November 2005 in Seattle at the Coffee Fest trade show. With the inventor Alan Adler, being an American inventor, is quite. He's achieved quite a ripe age when he invented the AeroPress, but he didn't actually intend to invent a new product in its entirety. But he actually just wanted to enable himself to brew a proper cup of coffee at home. So he started working on the AeroPress in 2004, and he had it in time for November 2005. He actually had it already made. So he is an inventor, but he's an inventor of toys. He actually made an aerobie flying ring that set the Guinness World Record for item with the first distance flown, which was 406 meters. Now, I know a while ago, I think it was in September 2020. Yeah, September 2020, I think I almost broke that record with my AeroPress by accidentally almost dropping it from the Drakensberg. But luckily that did not happen. I still had my coffee. But the AeroPress is a simple design. It resembles a syringe and consists of an open-ended cylindrical chamber and also a cylindrical plunger with an airtight rubber seal. So it's very much like a syringe. The other end of the open-ended chamber has a filter cap, and then you just fill it with paper filters or a stainless filter. So it works a lot like a plunger. Very similar, it just gets a lot of pressure added as well. So
Yeah, so I mean,
Yes.
like, if you say it works, like, I think one thing to just, add to that point, it might work a lot like a plunger, but I think there's like sometimes a perception that, it's like a it's basically a replacement for an espresso machine, which I just want to state for the record, it is not. Like, you cannot humanly possible get the amount of pressure in an AeroPress that you would get with a espresso machine. So I think, if memory serves correctly, espresso is about 9 bars of pressure, and the AeroPress is about half a bar to about 0.7 bars of pressure, which we'll get later, a bit later in this podcast. We'll discuss the amount of pressure you need to add, but I thought it might just be a quick point that I'd like to add.
Pieter, the design of the AeroPress is actually, it's inspired a lot of people to invent like accessories for it, and there's people that made something to increase the pressure to get it a bit more espresso like. Can't remember exactly what it's called, but yeah, it just changes the filter part to withstand a bit more pressure before releasing the coffee abruptly. So that's quite cool. But yeah, you won't get a proper AeroPress, a proper espresso. Yeah, it took, after he actually launched it in 2005, it only took 3 years before they started with the AeroPress Championship. But he didn't know about it. It wasn't planned. It actually was started by a guy, Tim Varney, who just started the championship in his small cafe in Oslo, the capital of Norway. And he had a full house of 3 competitors back in 2008. But he's been going at the championship, and he's still the guy that organizes the championship. And these days he gets more than 3,500 competitors per year. So yeah, it's a brewer with incredible versatility, and it also is getting a lot of people excited about coffee, and I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, and I think that's when we discuss a bit more about the recipes and how you can actually use the AeroPress. I really need to have a bit of a think how we're going to really get the point across that the AeroPress is a very versatile piece of equipment, and for that reason we try to give you a few tools that you can use. We will get to our recipe and something that I use in my daily life, and I find quite simplistic as just a takeaway, but we want to encourage our listeners to really experiment with it. I mean, we've in the past, we've discussed things like the grind size and how that impacts coffee. We talked about coffee ratios and the golden 60 grams to 1 liter, and I think we want to try and bring that all together in a few different ways to prepare coffee. But for today, yes, lekker Pierre. You have a question there.
Exactly there where you were talking about. Yeah. Just quickly, before you go on further, I just wanted to exactly that what you just said there about how you use it in your everyday life, and how it's such a versatile and really nice piece of equipment. And yes, I can like geek out on a lot of coffee things, especially when I used to fly. I didn't, pilots don't really work much. So I had a lot of time to spend a lot of effort on making coffee. But now sometimes I just quickly want my coffee fix, a good coffee fix, before I head off into the mountains. Or if I'm up there, I just want to have a really, so it would be amazing if you guys can do that, like when you're making coffee for people, they don't want to wait for hours and hours, or I'm exaggerating now with hours, but like 10 minutes for a cup of coffee. So that's where I found the AeroPress is actually nice. Like I can really just heat the water, put it in, but I don't think I'm getting the best or the most out of my AeroPress, and that's why I'm really keen to see where you take it with us. So yes.
Pierre, is it because you're in the aviation history that you chose the AeroPress as your preferred method of brewing?
Oh, it's
We
funny,
need those
Pieter.
dry.
Yeah, sharp, eh?
So, yeah, I mean, it's like you say, what's nice about the AeroPress is the simplicity of it. And, once you really get to use it, it's pretty, it's really pretty simple. There's two ways in which you can really prepare it. One is called the inverted method, and one is just the standard, as per the instruction manual that they give you. There's actually James Hoffman actually is a really good guy to follow on not generally, well, obviously to broaden your coffee knowledge, but he does make some good points. And in one of his videos, he actually did a bit of a comparison between the inverted method and just a normal way of preparing a coffee. So according to him, it basically doesn't make a big difference. But, what I found personally was that I use the inverted method for the simple reason that, basically why I use it is that if you use the standard method and you don't use your plunger, which is the back thing that you push into the chamber quickly enough so that there's a vacuum forming and it doesn't drip all the way through, you do get a bit of an uneven extraction. I personally like the inverted way of brewing. I can add my coffee in at the top and then basically add the water. So the inverted method is basically the plunger is at the bottom and then the chamber is over the plunger, and you can just add your coffee to the top. So so that again, that gives you a bit of versatility when it comes to different ways of cutting your cloth, as they speak. And then the second point is that I think it's really important to know with the AeroPress is the amount of pressure that you actually apply. So the principle of the AeroPress is, if you take it through steps, is you have your plunger chamber, you add your coffee, you basically stir it, which I'll explain later, and then add the water, put on the cap, and then you push it down. So what we discuss now is the amount of pressure that you actually need to basically push down that plunger. So what I found was that people generally using an AeroPress tend to think in the mindset of a espresso, the harder the better, and that's not at all the case. I think you need to think more towards smoothness and that you would like even extraction, and to do that you just really want to apply a constant, almost like a lower level of pressure, which I found, and I think it's one of that Frederik, who was the inventor? Alan.
Yeah.
Alan there.
Alan Adler.
Sorry?
Alan Adler.
Alan Adler. He basically, he brought in where you can just put your forearm at the top of the AeroPress and just use the weight of your forearms to push it down. And I would agree, like I've personally found that you really get the best effect if you push too hard. There's little material portions of the coffee that actually goes through the filter, and the filter is quite light and thin. So yeah, that's pretty much what I would go for, and I would usually, that pressure should be sufficient for you to press down within 30 seconds. Like a Pierre.
Okay, Pieter, yeah, like you actually just answered my question also there, like how long, because I know the Bialetti or the mocha pot, I have time that I wanted to percolate before I stop it, or where it should sufficiently have run through. Same with the espresso machines, you have your time for what you're letting it run or pouring the shot. So yeah, that's kind of what I was asking with the AeroPress, like how long should it take? And then also, and I know you probably are going to cover this at some point, but I thought I'll just ask as long as well. The pressure that you're feeling, obviously, when you're pushing it down, when you're plunging it, how much does the amount of coffee, because obviously if you put a ton of coffee in the AeroPress, there's a lot of particles that the water needs to push through, so you're probably going to feel more pressure. Where if you don't put a lot through, obviously it will be easier. So the amount of coffee is probably the most critical part with regards to how much pressure you're going to have.
Yeah, I think it's that's one element of it, but I also think it's how fine the coffee has been grinded. So how coarse your coffee is, that also has a big impact in terms of the amount of pressure and also the water temperature. So there's a few factors that actually does play a role in it, but I would say that as a starting point, because your recipe, like we discussed last time, your ratio should be fairly consistent. That's almost like the last step that you want to change. So, I'll still go for a, 60 to 1 liter ratio for the AeroPress. And basically, so that's a consistent. And if you find that you need to really push down hard, then I would look at either grinding a bit more coarse. So, so that's one element of it. And, like I said, what I'd usually use in an AeroPress is about 15 grams of coffee. We had a recipe 2 years ago. It was 2020, December or November. I think that recipe was on the 8th of November, which we have a nice little recipe set out there. But back then I was still of the mindset I liked 18 grams because I basically... I diluted it a little bit, so you can play around with it. But for this episode, we'll stick to the 15 grams, and then I usually add 200 milliliters of water. So how I usually go about that is that I would, for the first 30 seconds, I would add my hot water, and then I'll keep stirring it. I'll add like 50, 60 mils of water, keep stirring it until 30 seconds, then add more water until I have 200 milliliters in total. And then, after a minute, I'll start actually pressing it down so that I'm finished almost like in a minute and 30 seconds. That gives you, I must say, that gives you a fairly acidic type of coffee. I'm quite a fan of acidity. Some people, if you get it wrong, it might actually lean a bit too soury. But if there's a few things again that plays a role. If it's a well-developed coffee, so if it's a dark roast, then you might not get that full effect. But if you find that it's maybe a bit too acidic, then I would leave the coffee for a minute and a half rather than a minute before pressing down. And I think you're going to find that makes a big difference. And then on top of that, what I'd also do is I would maybe grind my coffee a bit finer. So that's pretty much, the few takeaways that I can give today is that keep to your ratio which you discussed last week, 1 to 60. That's 50 grams of coffee with 200 milliliters of water. So that actually gives you a little bit less now that I do the maths. So 15 grams and 200 milliliters of water, well, that's 5, so that's actually a bit more. So that's 75. Yeah, that's 75 to 1 liter, so it's a little bit of a high ratio. So that's the one that I use. So, but yeah, you can obviously experiment with that a little bit. Yeah. So I think that basically, I hope that gives everyone a little bit of an insight into, how I prepare my AeroPress recipe. And then, I think in the next episodes, we can discuss things like, for example, how stirring influences your, the flavor. Like, for example, if you agitate it a lot more, then obviously your extraction is higher. And, what that actually does in terms of maybe diluting it afterwards. So, there's so much in terms of the AeroPress that, we're not going to be able to cover the full spectrum in today's episode. But what I want you to walk away with, yes, Pierre?
No, carry on. Finish your thought there. Then I was going to just, I was just going to ask, so finish your thought and you might answer my question.
Yeah, so what I want you to work with today is that, start off, stick to your ratio. We just said, like, a 60 to 1 liter ratio is perfectly fine. You can start off with that. I've just tailored my recipes to be more like a 75 to 1 liter. That works really well for me. And that, you can add to that, say, 50 milliliters of water, stir it for 30 seconds, top it up to 200 milliliters of water, and start pushing down at 1 minute or 1 minute 30 seconds, and see how you like that recipe. And then next week we'll discuss ways in which you can alter it. And remember, the pressure that you apply, make sure that it's not excessive, meaning that just use the weight of your forearms to push down. So I think that pretty much is that's everything for today's episode on the AeroPress. Does that answer your question, Pierre?
Yeah, no, it's exactly what I wanted, like, from this, is like, it's always like a lot of times we get information overloaded, and before we know it, we need to have thermometers and proper, like, food scales and everything, and then it's just too much, and we end up not, like, bothering. So that's exactly what I wanted from this episode, was what is the basics I need to know to make a decent AeroPress, like Gegrond's AeroPress or Pieter's AeroPress, whatever, and then once I've now gone home and made my AeroPress a few times, I can then now come and say, okay, now I want to geek out a bit and give me all the, other intricacies about the AeroPress. So I think for this episode, it's actually perfect what you've just covered. And in the next one, I think we can now go practice a bit with what you've given us, and we'll put the show notes. We'll put Pieter's or Gegrond's recipe in there, the basic one. And then, everyone can go home and you practice, and we do get feedback from listeners, and, we can bring in some of those questions as well. So, no, the next one I'm ready to go into the details and the intricacies of the AeroPress. And that's kind of, I guess, where it leads to next is, you have this AeroPress now, and it's such a versatile that we keep on raving about how lightweight and how nice it is to take into the mountains. And that's where caffeine, I guess, comes in with regards to performance, because that's where me and Nicolette, per se, and, Pieter and Frederik's also avid hikers and runners. But, all of us athletes go out and really, we can use caffeine to our advantage. And we've done through the night camps with athletes. And this weekend, again, we're on the DGT run camp, where we'll go through the night from Monk's Kyle to Giant's Castle, hopefully. But it's all through the night as well. So can caffeine actually assist performance, and is it wise to use it? So on that note, I'll hand over to Nicolette. She's going to cover a few topics, a few points there. And Frederik, Pieter, feel free to ask a few questions if you do have. But yeah, Nicolette, brief us.
Hey guys, sorry for my what seems to be late joining, but in the background I just entertained the Dex dog and puncture my plug my wounds from trying to keep him quiet. It looks like carnage here in the background, so sorry for all the background noise as well. But yeah, in terms of caffeine, so great question. Does caffeine help with performance? And the answer is yes, it absolutely does. So I don't know when, but back in the day, caffeine was actually a banned substance, like other, certain EPO and performance enhancers that are not allowed in competition. Caffeine was on that list. And then they realized, I think it was difficult to regulate, and it wasn't as potent as some of the other performance enhancers, and so they removed it from the banned list. But it definitely does still provide quite a kick and a performance boost. So you might be asking, who's it relevant for? Is it your short distance runners, your 5Ks, your half marathon, full marathon, or ultra trail? And the answer is everybody. So everyone can benefit from caffeine. For most of us, it's just, what we know caffeine to do is wake us up in the morning and help with our morning run. So without that caffeine boost before we go run, you might actually find that you feel quite tired, but we don't usually experiment with that. I think most of us enjoy our cup of coffee before we go for our morning run. Can, tell me if I'm wrong, but certainly the standard procedure on our side. But how much coffee do you or how much caffeine do you actually get from your morning cup of coffee in a sports nutrition kind of perspective, and it's not that much. So 1 cup of coffee is about 95 milligrams of caffeine, and I'm not entirely sure how the AeroPress compares with that. Pieter?
Yeah, I haven't actually looked into, how much caffeine you'd actually get from an AeroPress. Obviously, it depends on the amount of grams of coffee you use. But what I can do is I'll take away, and then next week we can start the episode by giving everyone a bit of an update on how how much coffee you can maybe get from a gram of coffee. So yeah, that's a good point. I'll take that away. I always wonder, when the best time would be in a race or when training, to actually consume caffeine, if it's more towards the back end of long endurance runs, or if it's, if it's a shorter run before the event. But I think you'll touch on that a bit later.
You can have your standard cup of coffee, or if you want a performance-enhancing energy gel or a stronger boost than a cup of coffee, you want to look to have that about 30 minutes before you start. So have your caffeine, and then, pack your gear, get ready, and head out for your run. And by the time you've warmed up, that caffeine should be in full force. The statistics say 30 minutes to 2 hours, but for your average person, it's 30 to 45 minutes.
So Nicolette, I have something to ask or to say, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate or not, but I am going to put it out there because I expect there's more people that has the same question. Usually, the caffeine has a bit of an effect on your metabolic rate, and it's usually a kickstarter for the day in multiple fronts. Does caffeine actually have an I need to ask it, Pierre. More people, I'm sure there would be a few people who can relate. Once you have a cup of coffee, you don't want to have it just before an event, because that's going to kickstart a few fronts for you when it comes to events or to training. Is that true, or do you think it's a personal thing?
I think for your average person, it's quite true. I haven't come across scientific information on that, but I have read about it. And I think most of us have that similar situation. So the 30 minutes, every individual is also different in how they respond to caffeine and the amount that they require for it to enhance performance. And also to cause a bowel movement before starting your race. But just, you need to know that. So caffeine is something you definitely want to test in training. You don't want to save your caffeine pills for your 100-miler. These things are going to be great and strong, and I'm going to use them, at 2 a.m. on my race, but I've never tested them. No, that's not how you want to use caffeine. So you definitely want to know how long before your training run, before your race, that you need to take them. But I think 30 minutes for your average person will also be sufficient for your normal run. But then we move on to the ultra aspect, and it's a little bit of a different story. So you don't want to be taking in caffeine in the beginning. You're definitely not the first half of any ultra or even a marathon. So you want to save your caffeine punch for the second half or the latter stages of your race. And then, unfortunately, if you need the toilet, well, it was probably going to happen anyway. So maybe you can even plan to take your caffeine pills, 30 minutes out from the next aid station. That could be quite a clever one. But these things are difficult to prep and time exactly for an ultra run. And I think most of us are quite good at adapting on the trail and as we go. And then... yeah, I'm just trying to, my computer just shut itself down. But so the exact amount of caffeine.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, that was exactly the next question that I had is, in terms of the amount of coffee or caffeine that's, appropriate. I just want to check here because I think I mentioned last week or the week before, I have a long run or actually ultra distance this weekend, and I've just checked these high five like sachets, and they have, let me just check, I think it's like 30 grams of caffeine.
It should be in milligrams.
Yeah, milligrams. Yeah, right. So I think it's about 30 milligrams of caffeine per serving. What would you recommend for a long distance event?
So there's two trains of thought. The one is that you select your amount of caffeine based on your body weight. So the go-to number is 2 to 6 milligrams. So if you want to just average that out, about 4 milligrams per kilogram, and you can then calculate that based on body weight. Otherwise, if you want to go on per time, so for example, in the second half of your marathon, you want to take in per hour, the advised number is 50 milligrams per hour. But this is also, again, depends on the individual and what you've tested in training and what you know works for you. And then just a bit of a myth buster. At one stage, it was thought that you need to wean yourself off caffeine in the days leading up to your event, or even weeks. And I know a lot of triathletes and Ironman triathletes liked to do this. So for about 3 weeks before their event, they would not consume any caffeine at all, not even a cup of coffee in the morning, in order to have the caffeine work more effectively on the day. Now, recent science has, fortunately for most of us, has proven that this is not necessary, and caffeine does not become less efficient the more you use it. So you don't have to worry, and you don't have to go through those withdrawal symptoms and put your family through it as well. You can consume your normal caffeine per day right up to the race.
One thing I would do with the caffeine and ultras is to not, like, especially like you say you're doing 100 mile or whatever and you have to go through the night. I do stay away from, say, caffeine for the whole run, even if I'm, say, tired, like fatigued. I wait until I need it for alertness as well, or if you're sleepy. So if you say navigating through the night, then you kind of, it's not physically tired, because I'll rather save it for when I'm not feeling very alert. And then, especially if it's a self-navigational kind of thing, and I then use the caffeine for more as like a brain enhancer, I think. And also if you feel better, and like personally, caffeine works very well for me. I know some athletes, caffeine makes them jittery, nauseous, or not being able to focus very well. So they actually stay away from caffeine, where for me personally, caffeine works very well. But it's just because we've tested it in training and use it strategically. So I think that's the key to all of this as well, is to always use anything that you do bring into your racing strategy. Is it has to have a strategic reasoning for coming into it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wonder sometimes if there's also a bit of a placebo effect that goes with it. Like, I remember like Goo used to make these gels, these espresso flavored gels. Some people might know them, I'm not sure if they make them anymore. But, they'd say the same amount of caffeine in as another gel, which would be berry flavor. And I just always, for the life of me, felt like the espresso flavor one just gave me a bit of a more kick, like I just felt like that. It just felt like now I have some caffeine in my body and, I'm ready to go, versus a caffeine berry. I don't know. It didn't have the same. I didn't feel the same afterwards. So I think definitely that there might be and I think it actually feeds in a little bit to the point, Pierre, that we discussed last time with, like these little tricks that you play with yourself to reward you for, like say you're in long run. I think you had this lint ball that you mentioned last time. And for me, it was the Droewosh in this run. And, I think, some of that elements also, can have a big impact on your performance. So yeah, it's quite quite insightful. And are you guys planning to take? What would your typical strategy be for introducing caffeine into your race strategy or training? Would that be consuming it on the runs, like in forms of gel, or is there different ways in which you consume it on a run?
Yeah, so everyone, again, there is individual, but for me personally, I don't enjoy, straight gels too much, especially your strong caffeine ones. They tend to have a bad effect on my stomach. So I've played around with caffeine tablets. They actually come in little capsules, quite nice. I can't remember which brand we have, but there's a couple out there. And yeah, to just take those strategically, either if you want to test it in training, you can do it for an interval session, just make sure it doesn't cause stomach cramps or something like that. And then if you're all good, no side effects, then you can use it on your race. So we tested it on a through the night camp in the Drakensberg. And what Pierre was saying about saving it for when you're feeling really sleepy, that's actually to do with your circadian rhythm. So, your body's natural sleep system, it kicks in most strongly between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. So just to be aware, if you are doing 100-miler or more and going through the night or any through the night event, adventure racing, that's kind of the best time to plan to use your caffeine products. It's between 2 and 6 a.m. So on that camp, I took one, I think it was like 3 a.m. when I was feeling really bad. And yeah, it might be placebo. I think it's one of those things that can definitely have a strong placebo effect, but I felt much better within about 30 minutes. And yeah, the lint ball, it's cool. Sugar has a not so different effect to caffeine, but your body doesn't actually process food and nutrition the same way during the night as it does during the day. So again, part of the circadian rhythm, but it's more difficult to eat and digest food and get the energy boost from it during the night than it is during the day. So even during a race, it's a natural tendency and probably a little bit better for your body to reduce your food intake slightly during the night and maybe use caffeine if you can to help with the cognitive boost and keeping you awake.
Well, that's really interesting and insightful. I never actually thought of that, so I would have just thought, well, you're awake, and that's just, if you're awake in the night or in the day, it would be the same. But yeah, that's a really good point. Might make you actually think that maybe a strategy on these long distance events is to get the solid things, like the solid foods, down while it's still day and you're a bit more fresh, and then have like a strategy where towards the back end or night you have a bit more easily consumable foods. Maybe then you start switching over to some gels or something that goes down quite easy, versus maybe at the beginning you can maybe try and get a few solid food down. It's just
absolutely
something thinking out loud.
I would say that's a good strategy. Try to get in the most of your nutrition, especially if your ultra run starts at like 10 or 11 a.m. You want to be eating your late breakfast and your lunch and your evening meal all during the day. And then if you can have one good soup or meal at midnight, the rest of the night you'll hopefully be able to get through with more snacks and things. We all like to snack at night to help also just to keep us awake, but nothing too heavy on the digestive system.
Oh, that's really good. And then when the sun rises, then you have bacon and eggs. Full farmhouse breakfast.
Full house, yeah, for sure.
No, I'm just kidding. But that's really good food for thought. So thanks for sharing that with us. It's been, again, like as always, there's so much things to take away and to think about during the week, and especially with my race coming up in the next week or so. Definitely some lessons or advice that you've provided over the last 4 or 5 episodes that I'll be incorporating. So thanks, you guys. I think all our listeners and myself, I know Frederik as well, we all do appreciate the knowledge you're sharing.
It's an absolute pleasure, and all the best for your event.
thanks so much for joining on this week's episode of the Mountain Ground Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any of the episodes, making sure that you stay caffeinated and keen for adventures.